Good evening. You are watching Middle East Roundtable, a production by ThinkTech Global. And in this evening's program, we're going to be talking about the ugly partnership between the Mexican cartels, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and organized crime. I'm David Day, the host of this show, and we hope that this will be something that will raise some eyebrows and perhaps maybe affect some policy changes here in the United States, because this is an ugly partnership with enormous ramifications for U.S. security. To help us with this conversation, we have two experts in the field of organized crime that will provide us an enormous amount of depth. The first one is here in the studio, and I'd like to introduce to you the former special agent in charge of the FBI here in Hawaii. And for those of you who, and this is Mr. Charlie Goodwin. Charlie,
good afternoon.
It's great to have you back again, and appreciate you sitting down with us to do this show.
Always a pleasure.
Ladies and gentlemen, let me translate that fancy former title that you used to have for our audience. I mean, basically, you were the director of the FBI in the Pacific here, and I know there's only one director in Washington,
right,
but you were the FBI here for many years.
For 4 years, from 2003 until 2007.
Okay.
Yeah.
And also with us is another expert on organized crime. This is Mr. Grant Newsham, and Grant is a former diplomat with the U.S. Embassy in Tokyo. And Grant, from faraway places in the Pacific, welcome to Middle East Roundtable.
Okay, thanks, David. Nice to be here.
Gentlemen, we've got the curiosity of our audience raised a little bit with this particular topic, and let's talk initially about what is the big picture here. What do we know, and what's really going on? And as we look at the sweep of organized crime around the world, we've got such infamous notables as the triads from Hong Kong and the Asia region. We've got the Yakuza in Japan. We've got the Russian mafia. And then to our south, we've got the Mexican cartels.
And don't forget traditional organized crime.
And we've got our own local...
well, I mean, I'm thinking mainland traditional organized crime, as in the old Sicilian and Italian crime families.
The descendants of Al Capone.
Yeah, exactly.
And so for purposes of this program, I think, and I know, Grant, you have enormous expertise and depth in the field of organized crime in Asia. And what we want to do is perhaps look a little bit more, our focus for this program, on the Mexican cartels, the Latin American connection, unless there is something that ties into the Middle East that one or both of you know about. Fair?
Sure.
Okay, so let's start out with what do we do know, Charlie, in terms of the Latin American connection, if you will, between terrorist organizations and let's say the Mexican cartels. What can you tell us about that?
First of all, the Mexican cartels themselves are basically designated as narco-terrorists. I mean, they've been cutting off people's heads in Mexico for a couple of decades now, in trafficking and, human trafficking, drug trafficking, and that sort of thing. A lot of the, a huge amount of the drugs that come to the United States come through Central, South America, and Mexico. No question about it. Those are the primary smuggling routes.
In fact, but let me interrupt you for a second here. Let me ask our engineer here, production engineer, if you could show our audience visual number 7, if we could. If we could look at that for a moment.
Oh, there you go.
You've got the blue are the routes coming in from Asia, the red from the Caribbean and other southern countries, and then on up into the U.S. So I'm sorry, I interrupted you, Charlie, so go ahead.
And if you look at this diagram or this picture, I mean, this is primarily showing the trafficking into the United States across our southern border. I mean, there are clearly other avenues, and you know, I was going to mention that Afghanistan, for instance, is the largest producer of illicit opium products. That's heroin and that sort of thing. But that doesn't mean that all of the heroin that's coming to the United States comes to us from Afghanistan. Probably a relatively small percent, probably 6 to 10%. But most of, you know, heroin, for instance, has become much more popular in recent years. The price has gone down and that sort of thing. So it does traffic through Central and South America across the southern border of the U.S. So those drug routes, they've been well established for decades. And so we backing up again now to talk about narco-terrorists, the cartels in Mexico, they are strictly organized crime elements, and they have enforcers. They run their operations through force and terror, and as I said, cutting people's heads off. They've been doing that for a long time. They've been burying people in mass graves for a long time, and they are ruthless, brutal traffickers in drugs and human beings.
Let me ask our control room if we could, let's take a look at visuals 1, 5, and 6, if we could, while we're talking about the Latin American situation. And of course, these gangs that you've been talking about in Mexico, gangs like the Zetas or the Sinaloa, Charlie, notice that they've got these rather crude, in some ways, tattoo marks on them. And Grant, I know you've had a lot of experience in working with organized crime where you got tattoos involved. What do you make of this tattoo situation in Mexico? Is there any connection with the Asian gangs? Why do they have tattoos as well?
There's no, I think an anthropologist could probably answer the question better, but I don't know that there's a connection. It's, but there is some evidence of, I think, Chinese organized crime working with the Mexican gangs, oddly enough, in fields such as iron ore exports, which has been reported fairly recently. But I think tattoos are just popular.
I think it becomes almost a culture in the Central South American and Asian organized crime organizations or groups. You're going to have tattoos that identify people with those organizations.
All right, let's stay focused on Latin America for a moment here, and we've talked about kind of the trade routes and the vicious, ugly, terrorist characteristics of the Mexican cartels, and so if we describe that as one partner, let's look in Latin America, in the Latin American region, Charlie and Grant, to the other side of the partner, and that would be clearly a terrorist organization from the Middle East, present in Latin America. What do we know about that aspect of a partnership?
You want to take that one, Grant?
Why don't you have a shot?
Okay. You know, I think that a lot of it these days is rather speculative as to exactly what the connections are between Asia, Central and South America. There are clearly some drug routes that come from primarily Afghanistan and Pakistan through Nigeria and into Central and South America. But at this point, to say that there's a huge connection, or you know, a really substantial connection, I'm not sure that that's been. There's been a lot of talk about it recently, but I'm not sure that it's been fully documented. So that's one piece of it. The other side of that would be, in my estimation, rather a common sense sort of approach to what the problem is or potentially could be. And
meaning what?
And if you, for instance, we know that the drug routes and the human trafficking routes are very well established.
Into the U.S.?
Into the U.S.
Okay.
Across primarily the southern border. Now, there are other ways to get drugs. I mean, drugs come in through virtually all the ports. They come in through containers, but a huge percentage of the drugs come in overland across the Mexican border.
Right, okay.
Yeah. So, if you wanted to move terrorists, or if you wanted to move, for instance, larger weapons like RPGs or shoulder-held anti-aircraft systems and that sort of thing, you probably, because of the scrutiny at the ports and containers and certainly on commercial aircraft, you wouldn't be able to ship that sort of thing. So that would be the sort of thing that you'd have to mule in overland through tunnels or, you know, across the border. So in a common sense approach to things, which frankly seems to be pretty sadly lacking today, you know, in our border protection efforts, it seems to me like this would be a no-brainer for a terrorist organization. If they wanted to move substantial numbers of people and equipment across our border, that's where they'd be looking, at these established routes where they could form a relationship with the cartels.
Grant, what can you tell us about adding to or contradicting what the point that Charlie's just made about the presence of known terrorist organizations from the Middle East and Latin America?
Only in the current mandate of particularly Iranian terrorists. As Charlie noted, there has been, I wouldn't call it hype, but there has certainly been some headlines which perhaps haven't been backed up with evidence just yet. But the one way to look at the terrorist organized crime connection is not so much in a James Bond sort of way where the two groups join up to, say, attack the United States, but rather the organized crime actually provides service. The terrorists need to do something like move money, people, materials across a border, and that is where organized crime provides a service. And it's important to note that it's not just all organized crime, but rather there are specialized service providers who can handle these things, say freight forwarders, you know, people who can get documents you need to live in a place, can get you a place to live, provide a support function. But there's really a very limited number of these service providers, and that is we've seen this in Asia going back to the Middle East, and that is, say, the way to look rather than these two organs linked to it. The risk for an organ crime that's called, say, the United States is
Grant, let me interrupt you for a second on this point. Just we're going to go to a commercial break for a second here, and hold that thought, and we'll pick up with the use of service providers and the whole concept of tunneling above and below the ground by the drug cartels as a highway for terrorist organizations into the United States when we come back after the break.
Hi, I'm Jay Fidel. That's Liz Shue. We co-host Agritech in the Islands every other Monday, 4 to 5 p.m. here on the ThinkTech series. We love agriculture and aquaculture and of every kind and nature. And we bring in guests who can teach us such fantastic scientific things. What do you think, Liz?
I think it's cool, so we can grow more local food for local people.
All right, come here, 4 to 5 p.m., ThinkTech, Agritech in the Islands, every other Monday. We'll see you then.
See you. Aloha.
We're back. You're watching a program here on Middle East Roundtable talking about the ugly partnership between the Mexican cartels, organized crime, and terrorist organizations. And to help us with this discussion, we have in the studio with us the former special agent in charge of the FBI here in Hawaii, Mr. Charles Goodwin. And we also have with us Mr. Grant Newsham, a former diplomat with the U.S. Embassy in Tokyo and an expert on organized crime. And gentlemen, right before the break, Grant was on the point talking about wanting to make it clear that this particular partnership that we're talking about, that the terrorist organizations are not necessarily going to join up with the Mexican cartels and the cartels come in and fight, rather that the Mexican cartels are going to assist as service providers. And Grant, you were in the middle of a sentence when when I had to cut you off there. Why don't you finish this point?
Yeah, that's fair. A limited number of service providers, and that is where the connection works. This has been, we've seen this in Asia back through the Middle East to Europe. And another sort of good example that we've got was reported a couple of years ago was actually to get to understand how this works was Latin American cartels moving drugs through West Africa, making use of local terrorists, criminal gangs, and moving drugs up through the Maghreb, up to the desert region of West Africa, and then into Europe. But it showed how they would, actually that nexus between organized crime and terrorism, and also the service providing aspect to this, and it's a money maker for the local criminals, local terrorists. And there's been another presence for a long while that has been overlooked.
Let's take a look. We can have the production team put up visual number 8, because this is the point that Grant is just talking about, the Al-Qaeda North African drug routes coming in from Latin America, then spreading up through the, I believe you used the term Maghreb, right, Grant?
That's right.
The desert regions. And so effectively, the Latin American cartels have provided an enormous financing for Al-Qaeda in West Africa. We know this already, correct?
Yeah, I think that's correct. Yeah.
One
of the
go ahead.
If I could, one of the things that you have to remember is that all of these organizations, whether it's Al-Qaeda, whether before them the Taliban, and forgetting for a minute about the radical Islamic piece to this, at their base, these organizations are all organized crime organizations. The Taliban, Al-Qaeda, they all make their money and finance themselves for there are a few donors, for instance, in Qatar or Saudi Arabia or somewhere like that are relatively well-heeled. But in the final analysis, they make the bulk of their money through, if you will, traditional organized crime activities such as human trafficking, prostitution, drug trafficking, kidnap for ransom, robbery, extortion, bribery, you name it. It's a racketeering organization.
Control room, if you would put up visuals 2 and 3 here. And I guess the point that I want to make while we are seeing these pictures that I think that our audience perhaps doesn't really understand is that these Islamic Muslim organizations, we know that ISIS, for instance, is basically trying to return to a 7th century Sharia law. And Hezbollah, Hamas, Al-Qaeda, all of these have some tie back to the Muslim religion, and doing drugs in that religion is a big no-no. And what you're saying is that
but they don't have any problem at all trafficking and selling drugs to infidels. I mean, that's not a problem for them religiously.
So the non-drugs that only applies to them, and
exactly, just like alcohol and prostitutes and all that sort of thing.
Grant, anything on this point?
Well, I would just note that once again it goes back to this service providing aspect, and even if the Mexican cartels were dealing in something else, whiskey or whatever, take your pick, that they would still have within them certain people who are able to provide these specific services that a terrorist group needs to get across border and to get things across the border. And in this case, if you consider how the, say, illegal aliens are looked after when they get into the United States and moved to almost every state, looked after, fed, housed, and get necessary documents to live, this is something that a terrorist organization would find useful. And it's a service that the Mexicans can provide. The drug angle, I think, is a distraction in this case.
I agree that they're clearly service providers. I was only laughing because these days it seems to me like the government is providing about half of those services for them.
I think you have a point, yes.
You know, one of the things that I think that the service provider concept, let's address this for a moment, because the point that's both fascinating as well as frightening is that we know that the Mexican cartels, you've seen the chart, you've seen the map, you've read it in the news. The Mexican cartels have basically a 6-lane freeway into the United States at several different points. And they have a ready-made infrastructure through their drug and human trafficking into the United States. And whether that be through tunnels, similar to the tunnels that Hamas used in Gaza, similar to tunnels that the North Koreans have used across the DMZ, they have the tunneling expertise to move the RPGs, the heavier weapons across the border, as you pointed out, Charlie. But they also have the above-ground
yeah, I mean, there are
methods
still,
of moving across the border.
There's still miles and miles of unprotected border where you can cross the river and not have to go over a fence or under anything. You know, you just walk into the United States.
I think one other point that I wanted to make to get your reaction, gentlemen, on is this. We know that North Korea has provided nuclear consulting services with Iran. And we know that North Korea has done arms deals with the terrorist organization Hezbollah, right, and also with Hamas. And so that we don't have the evidence yet that the North Koreans are involved with the Mexican cartels, at least not yet. And what we've discussed so far in this program, unless I've missed something, is that the evidence of the presence of these Middle East terrorist organizations in Latin America is not precisely documented as of the time that this program is being broadcast. Fair statement so far?
I think so. But there are clearly some indications.
And one of the indications is testimony, if I recall, Charlie, before the briefing before the Senate Armed Services Committee by the Southcom Commander Air Force General Douglas Frazier, and he was talking about the development of Iranian assets into the tri-border region between Brazil, Paraguay, and Argentina, to setting up a Shiite terrorist base in Latin America. And this is just one of the pieces of information that's starting to
well,
surface.
And then just the fact that, and I've forgotten the exact number, but just recently it was documented the opening of a number of new Iranian embassies in Central and Latin American countries, Central and South American countries. So there, besides the terrorist spread, there's also a legitimate, arguably a legitimate government interest on the part of Iran in expanding their influence.
Grant, what, in terms of the law enforcement and U.S. intelligence, what do you see as maybe the shortcomings in terms of handling or breaking up this partnership between terrorist organizations and organized crime?
A couple of things. One is that, when I mentioned the service providers, that it's a very effective approach, and I've seen it used before, is to actually sort of laterally penetrate groups by going after the providers. And rather than trying to start at the street level or with the mosque rats or with individual terrorists and trying to work up, but rather getting in laterally, if you can get good access to the providers, that is one approach that is not often used. But another aspect to all of this, and I think it is relevant because there's been headline statements by politicians that ISIS and the Middle Eastern terrorists are coming across the border. But one's really, and of course it's the intelligence business, so people don't tell everything they know. But going back some years, I think U.S. intelligence services have been hampered by a system that rewards effort against targets of least importance. If you where you're promoted based on the number of alleged recruitments you get, and it's easy to recruit, say, an African, then you'll get lots of Africans. If it's hard to recruit an Al-Qaeda or an ISIS member, that could take you years, if ever, then the effort will go against the easy targets. And this really is, such a simple, commonsensical explanation for many of the shortcomings that the U.S. intelligence services seem to have. And, one is often left scratching his head, about this. But I think we're seeing this play in connection with this idea of terrorists coming across the southern border. The absence of it does not mean it's not happening, but the inability to really penetrate targets of the most use to the United States it's been a troubling thing that's been reported on for at least the last 30 years.
Grant, let me see if I understand precisely what you're saying. What you're saying is that one of the weaknesses of law enforcement and the intelligence agencies in the U.S. is that the way people are promoted in our own system has to do with the numbers of bodies that they're able to recruit in a counterterrorism effort into the organizations. And so what you're saying is that a soft target, easier to recruit into an organized crime operation as opposed to one of the harder terrorist organizations. So we don't really have the intelligence into Al-Qaeda and ISIS like we might have into the Mexican cartels or the Yakuza or other organized crime. Is that what you're saying?
That's what I'm saying. As I say, I'm not the first person to think of this. This has been reported in articles and books for a long time. But it is indeed a problem. Another aspect that some people have commented on is in some certain law enforcement agencies in particular, and Charlie would have some ideas, of course, on this, is that the assignment system is often in 2 or 3 year blocks. And that tends to discourage really the long-term patient effort against more complex cross-border operations, and a tendency to go after very low-level bugs and often characterize those as perhaps more than they are. So these are some pretty simple explanations for a lack of intelligence.
All right, we're going to go to a commercial break in just a moment. When we come back after the break, what we're going to do is talk a little bit about the changes or U.S. policy implications to try to block or break up these partnerships by way of bolstering national security. And stay with us. You're watching Middle East Roundtable, and I'll see you on the other side of the break.
Aloha, my name is Daniel Luke, and this is my co-host, Ing. We'll be here every other Monday on New Media, The Bleeding Edge on ThinkTech, talking about the intersection of social media and the news. We'll cover technology, trends, and other fun stuff. Did I leave anything out?
Well, I'm here to keep you honest, so that's my job, to remind you of everything you've forgotten and to challenge you at every point.
Excellent. My wife tells me that I'm wrong about quite a lot.
We're back. You're watching Middle East Roundtable. This is a production of ThinkTech Global, and I'm your host, David Day, and we're talking about the ugly partnership between the Mexican cartels and terrorist organizations, particularly in the Middle East. And helping us with this discussion is the former special agent in charge of the FBI here in Hawaii, Mr. Charles Goodwin, and also a former U.S. diplomat with the American Embassy in Tokyo, Mr. Grant Newsham. And gentlemen, the point that we want to try to examine for the kind of the balance of the show here is we've talked about the drug trafficking routes. We've talked about the relationships that exist. There are some pieces of evidence now surfacing that there are some of the Middle East terrorist organizations are physically present in Latin America. We don't know yet about ISIS, but the Al-Qaeda connection is fairly well documented. And we were talking about earlier in the program that the Latin American and drug connection is a major financier of Al-Qaeda. And so the point that I'd like the two of you to help us with is, what do we need to do as a country, or in terms of national policy, to handle this problem? We've talked about how ugly it is, how dangerous it is to have these narco-terrorists teamed up. We've talked about the easy routes that they have into the United States. What do we do about it? And Grant, I'm going to flip this to you first.
Well, this is one that everyone talks about it, but nobody does much. Obviously, the borders are just much too porous. You've got to get this is commonsensical. You have to get a handle on the borders. You should be much stricter about issuing visas, and a lot of things that don't come across the border illegally. You just have a sensible visa policy from countries where the people who cause us the most problems come from. The intelligence services, it's been one failure after another, starting just take the Shah of Iran and go one disaster after another, where the targets of most importance to the United States are just black holes, whilst these targets that are really of no interest but help one get promoted get lots of attention. This is one going back to the basics of the intelligence business. Understanding terrorism and organized crime as a business is very helpful, particularly if you want to target the parts that are going to cause it the most, that are going to cause the most damage. And I mentioned going after, for example, service providers versus going after say a street drug dealer, or a very low-level terrorist. You really understand where you can cause them the most trouble. A good financial effort against both of these would be good. I've been disparaging of the intelligence community in general, but the U.S. financial intelligence people often do excellent work. Turn these people loose with some freedom, and that would be a profitable approach to things. So I would stress the intelligence business really has not performed very well for a good long while, and going back to the basic approach to it would be something. Those are a few ideas.
I can't disagree with anything that he's said about the intelligence and the failures of intelligence, but I would say this, though, post 9/11, that it's much better, the intelligence sharing, for instance, between the FBI, the CIA, the Drug Enforcement Administration, people that would be key players, Customs Border Patrol, in this particular problem on the Mexican-U.S. border. It is way ahead of where it was pre-9/11. People didn't talk to each other. Now there are joint terrorism task forces. There are local task forces that address these issues. So while we are still sadly lacking, and he's right, these places like Iran, North Korea, they are black holes in terms of our intelligence capabilities. And it's for those very reasons, like Grant mentioned, penetrating Al-Qaeda, penetrating ISIS, places like that. Very, very difficult to do for a lot of reasons, cultural reasons, language barrier, all of that sort of thing. And then what we do is we turn around, and our border is so porous that we can't stop the flow, number one. And then we, whether it's for good or bad, tie our hands with organizations that have had quite a bit of success in, for instance, intercepting communications, NSA interception of communications between the terrorist groups, the emails. We know that they make extensive use of the internet and telephones, cell phones, and that sort of thing, satellite phones. and yet we are hung up on who in the U.S., who should we be intercepting, what kind of scrutiny or power and ability should NSA have to conduct this surveillance, and it's all legitimate discussion. And I don't have a specific answer, but I know that if we're going to disrupt these organizations, we have to have that capability.
You see the intelligence community in the United States, Charlie, is not able to really focus on this ugly partnership between the Mexican cartels and ISIS and Al Qaeda?
You know, you can't talk about just the connection between, for instance, Al Qaeda or ISIS and the Mexican and the drug cartels. You have to look at, you know, the U.S. as a whole, and what are we able to do in terms of targeting radical jihadists here in the U.S. Where are they? You know, what cities are they in? How are they conducting themselves? Are they in mosques? We don't know that because of, you know, problems with political correctness and our inability to penetrate and recruit people who are in the know.
That's the thing.
It is a failure in that respect. And as Grant pointed out, the CIA, you know, this all began in Iran with the hostage taking, you know, way back when Carter was president, and he had basically destroyed the CIA. And you know, at one point in time, we had pretty good intelligence, but these days, in these places, again, like North Korea and Iran, we don't have much intelligence there.
So we're operating as a country in terms of what you're saying is we're operating as a country almost
in the dark,
or blindfolded,
yeah,
in a situation where we have our military assets are principally designed for a different type of attack.
Right.
And you know, on the way to the studio here, I was thinking about Grant. If you remember back, one of the I think very successful guerrilla terrorist organizations that we've seen in our lifetimes were the Viet Cong in South Vietnam, and one of the infrastructure assets that the Viet Cong had were the Cu Chi tunnels. They had this extensive tunneling network that allowed them to move with impunity throughout the whole Saigon region in South Vietnam at the time, and very devastating effect. And our military was unprepared for this and took some devastating hits. And we have the same thing.
You couldn't tell the Viet Cong from the South Vietnamese.
Right.
And you know, in this day and age, these people, well, ISIS is wearing some uniforms, but by and large, Al Qaeda, you know, they didn't wear uniforms per se. So it's been an enemy that's been very difficult to focus on and attack.
Well, we also have the Mexican cartels operating, you know, here in the United States, and they don't necessarily look like this photograph when they're here in the United States. You know, they've got shirts on and you know, not as visible.
And you know what? They're very sophisticated too. I mean, they're putting, like traditional organized crime did and Asian organized crime has done, they put money into legitimate businesses. Yeah, there's more and more expansion into things like that. Now, fortunately, I don't think, Al Qaeda and ISIS, they're still making, right now ISIS is making most of their money by smuggling oil out of northern Syria and Iraq. And that's why I think, you know, the U.S. and the alliance over there that's recently been formed is targeting those oil refineries and trying to stem the flow of money to ISIS, cut off their money supply. But even in the towns and cities they've taken over, you know, they take money from the banks, they extort money, they make people pay for just about everything that they do. So it's again, just a criminal enterprise.
Grant, we've got just a couple minutes left in the show here. A last word on this whole topic. Over to you.
First thing I would note is you know, one, don't underestimate these groups. You know, they have surprised us time and again, and one should be very careful, despite, you know, just the absence of clear evidence that apparently, don't underestimate them. Additionally, this idea that certain places are black holes it's not as if it's a law of physics at work. It's simply a wrong way of going about things. Reward patient effort against the targets of most interest and most importance to the United States, and you will find that you get results. Every one of these groups is as riven by just resentments and factions and fissures as any group of humans. But if you're not willing to make the effort to go after them, then don't be surprised if you don't get results. And it's very convenient to describe them as black holes. All that does is cover up failure. So those are a couple things that one does want to keep in mind. But we will, these people that say, oh, try us, and they will, don't underestimate. But we have got to culture our way to go about the U.S. law enforcement and intelligence services do not have limited resources. There's sometimes a perception that they've got tons of people and tons of money. They do have tons of money, but they don't have tons of people, and resources do get devoted in the wrong direction. So there is an angle to that. But one is, the current situation has probably been 30, 40 years in the making. So it's not something that's going to be fixed overnight.
All right. One last short, quick point.
Well, we have had some successes. I mean, there have been plots foiled around the country, around the world, but we have to remember that we, the United States, we have to be good all the time, and they only have to be lucky once.
And that is a wrap for here with Middle East Roundtable. A dangerous situation, this ugly partnership with some substantial challenges for the United States coming up, and we'll be watching this closely. We'll see you next week on another ThinkTech Global program. I'm David Day. Good night.